The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Gabriel Boric, President of the Republic of Chile. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, members of the General Assembly, and to all inhabitants of the world listening to us. 2025 will mark 80 years since the day on which 51 countries took the momentous step of creating the United Nations. Our country, Chile, has always been a proud member of this collective effort. We were at that time one of the founding countries, and now, almost 80 years later, we continue to defend democracy, peace, multilateralism, and integral respect for human rights. Since 1945, the world has changed a great deal. Indeed, it would have been very complex at the time, full of hope due to the end of the war that had been torn apart by poverty, destruction, and death, which was left in its wake, and already marked by the infamy of colonialism. We saw simmering emancipation, inexorable emancipation of peoples from their executioners. Much time has passed since then, and the world has changed radically. Just imagine if a 20-year-old from that time were to magically wake up in 2024. I'm sure they wouldn't be able to believe what they see. The world has changed, but some things remain the same. One example of this that has been repeated since this rostrum is the UN Security Council. 2024's world is not the same as 1945's. This morning, I listened to the UN Secretary General. I listened to President Lula from Brazil and President Biden from the United States. They all explicitly expressed their agreement to reforming the Security Council to adjust it to today. What or who is holding this up? Is anybody in this assembly opposed to this? Chile proposes that we set a deadline for this reform. And when the UN celebrates its 80th birthday, we'll do so with a Security Council that is in line with current times, that includes Brazil from Latin America, India, and at least one country from Africa, among others. Nothing is stopping this except the lack of our own will. Human institutions depend on the will of their leaders, us. And those that are not able to adapt to their era run the risk of failing. It's worth remembering the swift collapse of the League of Nations. There are times at which change is the best way of ensuring the continuity of our history, and this is exactly one of those. The same goes for financial governance. We welcome the efforts that have been made by global financial institutions to modernize. But above all, Chile supports the proposal of Africa, led by Nigeria, to address tax evasion, illicit financial flows, and inequalities in tax collection through the establishment of a Convention on International Tax Cooperation. This would ensure that we have a more transparent and inclusive system, a global taxation system that supports the financing of the fight against climate change, in which countries but also large companies are held accountable for their movements and contribute what is due to those countries from which or whom they have obtained their wealth. I'm also in no doubt that it is the possible leadership of a woman, as is noted in the agreement of the Pact for the Future that we signed this morning, that might come from our Latin America on the basis of territorial rotation. This is the person who might be able to lead this process down the reformist path already set by Antonio Guterres. President, leaders of the world. The international community is occasionally accused of double standards in the face of violations of human rights that happen around the world. We condemn what our adversaries do, but when an alleged friend is the one violating the UN's Charter, we look aside or we express ambiguity. Chile rebels against double standards in human rights. As a young Latin American and left-wing president, I would clearly, strongly like to say that human rights must always be respected everywhere. We must demand this respect regardless of the political colour of the dictator or the government that violates them. Because the Palestinian teenager murdered in Gaza, the Venezuelan worker who's forced to leave their homeland, the Ukrainian child abducted by Russia, the silenced opposition in Nicaragua, or the woman expelled from school in Afghanistan just for being a woman, are all, above all, human beings. And the voice of all nations, regardless of their political position, should be raised in their defense. This is a principles-based position beyond any geopolitical interest that we defend in Chile. For this reason, I refuse to choose between the terrorism of Hamas or the genocide carried out by Netanyahu's Israel. We have no reason to choose between barbarity. I choose humanity. We denounce the illegal occupation of Palestinian territory and the de facto denial of the existence of an independent Palestinian state by the occupying country. From Chile, we call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza that would bring an end to the suffering and the massacre of the Palestinian population, which has already claimed more than 40,000 lives. And imagine just the number of wounded. We also clearly and unambiguously demand the immediate release of the hostages held by Hamas. We also note that Israel must respect international law, must halt the establishment and expansion of illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian territory, and bring an end to the massacre in Gaza and the indiscriminate attacks that it has been carrying out on the civilian population. And in line with our consistent state policy, we insist on the need to reach a sustainable two-state solution behind defined, secure, internationally recognized borders in line with 1967 borders. Furthermore, Russia's aggression on Ukraine must stop. The United Nations is the right body to bring an end to this flagrant transgression of international law. We can't accept the normalization of one country invading another and taking away part of its territory. For medium-sized countries such as ours, demanding respect for international law is the main safeguard that we have for the respect of our own sovereignty, respect for our own territorial integrity. And today, from this rostrum, I particularly wish to stress the situation of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia and taken onto Russian territory. They must be returned to their families. Before this assembly, Chile reaffirms its commitment to democracy, which remains always the only system able of maintaining peace, reaching sustainable development, and protecting dignity, rights, and fundamental freedoms. For this reason, we are concerned to see increasing disaffection among citizens at this form of government all around the world. We also are concerned to see the emergence of authoritarian leaders who persecute or insult those with ideas different to their own. It's our duty to speak up and fight against those who erode democracy, be it through authoritarianism or by disseminating fake news unashamedly. At the same time, we must respond to the needs and anxieties of our people to ensure that they can once again trust in democratic institutions and mechanisms. We are concerned to see how these threats are closing in on our region. Chile will continue to take steps to build bridges between diverse societies, seeking the integration of the voices from Latin America to promote peace and stability, as we've been doing recently in the meeting with the President of Spain and President of Brazil at the Summit of Progressive Leaders. This doesn't stop us from firmly condemning any violation of human rights or international law or violations of democracy in neighboring countries. We are particularly alert to the critical situation in Venezuela. Here we have a dictatorship which is trying to steal an election, which persecutes its opposition and is indifferent to the exile not only of thousands but rather millions of its citizens. We need a political outcome to this crisis, which recognizes the triumph of the opposition in the latest elections and undertakes peaceful transition towards a democracy. I also must say that unilateral sanctions imposed by the United States, as I personally said to President Biden, do not assist in resolving the conflict. Rather, on the contrary, they worsen it. That's because economic sanctions most affect the Venezuelan people. They affect the Venezuelan people more than their government. They affect the most humble, the workers. The political crisis combines with the economic crisis, and together these crises have pushed more than 7 million Venezuelans into exile. They've been forced to leave their country. Of these, around 800,000 are in Chile. And I'd like to be clear on this point, be responsible here. Chile is not in a position to receive more Venezuelan migrants. United States authorities, I called on them to lift economic sanctions in the South because we know that they only cause more poverty for peoples and not for dictatorships. None of us, not even the most powerful, can face phenomena such as the climate crisis, pandemics, digital revolution, transnational organized crime, etc. alone. We need each other. We also need the United Nations and a stronger, more active international community. This is the vision that we've promoted through our involvement in various United Nations bodies. I'd particularly like to highlight Chile's recent presidency of the Economic and Social Council under Paula Narváez. I'm also speaking on behalf of all of my fellow Chileans in noting our concern at the rising transnational organized crime and the devastating effects of such crime on the security and development of countries, as well as on democracy and on people's lives. It's fundamental for our governments to act together and to coordinate public policies, strategies, and operational capacity to curb financial crime, drugs trafficking, trafficking in persons and in weapons, which all affect our countries. Security is currently the main concern of the majority of people in Chile, but also in the whole of Latin America. And states cannot surrender to nor normalize violence and organized crime. Standing steadfast against crime, steadfast against corruption, tireless in building communities and social cohesion in our societies. Chile is also committed to developing regulations to channel the progress of artificial intelligence ethically, transparently, and responsibly. Such a development should respect human rights but protect personal data and promote the integrity of information and its use in the digital era. Today, and I'm sure that many of you already have AI apps on your smartphones, today artificial intelligence reproduces prejudices and stereotypes as a result of reinforced existing biases from the databases that they use. Should we trust that these large companies simply regulate themselves? History has taught us that this doesn't work. The international community must look after the weakest who are being excluded from this new world and ensure that they can be involved in it. If we don't act now, for instance, by demanding traceability in algorithms, data audits, and corrective human interventions, we might in a few years see a new form of extermination, digital extermination, of non-hegemonic cultures. This would lead to the loss of the valuable diversity of humanity. Let's not allow this to happen. Artificial intelligence and new technologies can represent a tremendous contribution to the world. Today, it's worth remembering the zeroth law of Asimov's laws of robotics, which in literature the last century already forced us to establish that a robot cannot harm humanity or, through inaction, allow humanity to come to harm. And finally, I'm obliged to call your attention to the greatest challenge that we face as a generation, the climate emergency. Protecting and sustaining life on Earth is something that we need to do now. And I'm saying this from Chile, a country that has been affected by drought, floods, and fires that are increasingly frequent. But here, borders are irrelevant, as you're well aware, because we're all affected equally by, for instance, Cyclone Idai, which just a couple of years ago flattened Malawi and Mozambique. We also see fires in Australia, floods in Bangladesh, the dry corridor in Central America, rising sea levels affecting the Maldives, and fires that are currently raging in Cordoba, Argentina. Let's not deny science. Let's not deny our responsibility as humanity over this crisis. In Chile, we are playing our part. We're changing our energy matrix. We're leaving aside fossil fuels, moving towards carbon neutrality, protecting our seas and our woodland. We are also preserving the Antarctic. Chile is an Antarctic country and will continue to be so. We have ratified the Oceanic Governance Treaty, the BBNJ Treaty, and I invite all countries to join it. And further, to support Chile's position in particular of Valparaiso as the headquarters for the treaty that I just mentioned. In light of the scale of the challenges that we face, isolated efforts are not enough. We need all of us, particularly the big powers and those that benefit from the indiscriminate exploitation of natural resources around the planet and have done for decades, to shoulder their responsibility and to support with resources, not just good intentions, those who are left behind today. We can't forget that many of the countries that are developed today are so developed specifically because they plundered the wealth of other peoples for all too long and did so facing impunity. We face many challenges, but our fate is not set in stone. I therefore hope, and I'm optimistic when I look towards our shared future. It falls to us to build a fairer and more dignified world for all of us and for future generations. A few weeks ago, Elvira Hernandez became the second female Chilean poet to obtain the National Literature Prize since Gabriela Mistral, who has a Nobel Prize for Literature. And here I would like to paraphrase a warning contained in one of her poems. We are migratory birds, but we've become used to behaving as monuments. Let's not turn multilateralism and the United Nations into a monument, a sterile, static monument. Let us turn this great historic achievement, born out of the Second World War, into a renewed bright light for 2024, to be able to improve the quality of life of whole of humanity. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Chile.